look how far we've come, all the things we've done, did it all with love, beauty from the bottom up. All I want is you, you're my favorite view, but there's nothing more, girl, you make my heart beat.
Welcome back, Bumble Bitches. I am here today with Amanda once again. Very excited to have you back.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back. We had such a great conversation last time. I was so thrilled when you were like, we should do this again.
Oh, yeah. You are a whole wealth of information, and it's fun picking your brain.
Oh, I love that. Thank you.
Of course. So today we are going to be talking about the 4 attachment styles, or the 4 most known attachment styles. There has been branches off of things, however you want to phrase that.
I know they're always trying to get like closer and closer to like, I feel like we just add words to try to describe more accurately what's happening. Right. But I think the basis is still those same 4.
Definitely. And the book that I read or listened to on Audible for this information is, I should have had that pulled up, Master Your Attachment Style by Scott A. Young. Fairly quick read. It took about 3 hours, an hour and a half if you're doing it on double speed.
I love that. I could never double speed, but good for you.
And it helps me focus. My mind likes to go off to Wonderland sometimes. So when I bump up that speed, it keeps my attention on it.
Wow.
So before we jump into the questions that I have for you, I just wanted to touch on the 4 different attachment styles that was hit on in the book and give a little description of each of them so the people who are listening kind of get an idea of what they might be or what their partner may be.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one I have written down is dismissive avoidant. And the attributes that Scott contributed to this one was difficulty being close to others, hard to open up, doesn't like to depend on other people. Romantic partners tend to want more intimacy than a dismissive is comfortable giving. In childhood, they were used as an emotional punching bag and avoid to not fall into this role again in romantic relationships. Sometimes they have inflated egos. They have little memories of childhood. They held back negative emotions to avoid backlash in childhood. And they believe that they can only rely on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything to add on to that? Anything that maybe has stood out to you when you're working with your clients?
We could see how that would be problematic in relationships, right? If that person is only ever capable of reliant on self, right? That's, and it's scary, but like you mentioned dismissive, avoidant, and I feel like maybe would share some also with fearful, avoidant type person, right? However you describe that, but they want and desire connection, but like can't tolerate it, right? So then they end up pushing people away. It's almost reactionary. But I do think it deeply rooted in trauma and gosh, so much of what we bring from childhood still exists, right? But especially in attachment styles. And then that just gets played again when we try to find a partner, right? A romantic partner is often like still kind of mirrors some of the things that we learned from our parents. I think that's like the one relationship that has so many through lines, right?
Right.
Unless we're aware of that enough to change it.
Bubba. Park. Good, Bubba. There we go. I know you're missing your dad.
Do we have a doggo that's trying to find dad?
We do. So.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. We have Ivy, and my husband just got his dog Bane, and he's still a puppy. He's 8 months old.
Oh my gosh.
So every time husband leaves the room, he tries to break the rules and look around and try to find him.
I will investigate.
Right. All right. The next one that I have written down is the fearful avoidant, which you also just kind of touched on a little bit. And some of the attributes attached to this attachment is a need for attention, believes that they don't deserve love or attention even though they crave it. They struggle with autonomy and intimacy, so they can tend to become very enmeshed with the person that they're with. They are dependent on others for a positive view of themselves. There's high anxiety, There is a lot of fear wrapped up in abandonment. Leave it, Bubba. I know. They experience disorganized attachment to parents due to the harm being caused, so emotional neglect, and but they had the need to attach the parent because that parent was their sole survival in childhood. And Scott commented on the direct link to sexual activity, and because there is such a disorganized function inside of them, they tend to have higher sexual activity and more partners throughout life. Mm-hmm. They can be identified as serial daters, jumping from relationship to relationship, because once the attention meter's not being filled anymore, they kind of look for that new love again, that new high. They can be known to be hot and cold, and parents may have relied on the child for emotional support, which has led to hypervigilance with people's emotions.
Yeah, I mean, when you see people in that light, there's this like hot and cold, like you were saying, there's a desperate need to connect, but not maybe sure how to deepen that connection or to sustain it across time. And so it wears off, right? And so they keep jumping to this person and this person and this person, which I think is also a reflection of something else that you mentioned in the description of that attachment style earlier, which was they need outside approval for self, right? So they're seeking these partners, not just first, because they're sexually promiscuous, but because those relationships are helping them to see themselves as worthy of love or connection in some way.
Yeah.
And I think that the more like the previous attachment style that we discussed is probably more often cold, more often dismissive, more often avoids that entirely. Whereas this attachment style like wants it, just doesn't really know how to do that.
Right. The next one is the anxious preoccupied. And this one is described as a negative view of self while having a positive view of others. They may often say others are reluctant to get close to me. They may believe that their partner doesn't actually love them or only puts up with them because they're providing something for them. They want to merge themselves with somebody, and that can scare off potential partners. So they're clinging and they want as much attention and as much love as they can get, even when it's inconvenient or maybe uncomfortable for the other person to give in the moment. They tend to doubt themselves. They tend to believe that people cannot be as committed as they are in romantic relationships. They find it very easy to fall in love with people. So when I think of that, what comes to my mind is after 3 weeks of knowing somebody, you already believe you're in love with them. They derive their self-worth from their partner. There is a large fear of abandonment, and due to that fear of abandonment, there is an increase in anger and jealousy. They are more likely to enter into abusive relationships, and then they tend to idolize their abuser, due to the people-pleasing aspect of the anxious preoccupied. And then something that we'll touch on later on in this conversation is protest behavior. And one of the prevalent things of protest behavior with the anxious attachment is threatening to leave when they don't get what they want out of a situation. They tend...
Sorry, you mentioned abuse, that they tend to, this is an attachment style that is prone to that or maybe vulnerable to that. But I also wondered if this attachment style would, in some cases, be the abuser, right? Because it's so suffocating and they try to, hold on to this person, and they will, really freak out or make it a big problem if they don't get what they want, type of thing. It's also got a lot of overlap, I think, from the other attachment styles that we were talking about, right? Where they also are reliant on outside people, outside sources to give them what they need. And I don't think many of the other attachment styles, other than a secure attachment style, would even be rooted in self being able to self-soothe or give yourself good energy at all. Right. And so until we can move into that space, I think that we'll see a lot of the same problems.
Right. I noticed, just like with some of the mental illnesses like borderline and CTPSD.
PTSD.
Yeah, my dyslexia kicks in hard with that one.
I gotcha. Yeah, the post-traumatic stress, the chronic or complex post-traumatic stress. Yeah.
And then narcissistic personality disorder, some of those traits can bleed into one another, so it can be hard to diagnose which one is which. And I noticed the same thing with the attachments. Some of those things can cross over and bleed into one another.
So and I just think it's important to add there too, because you're so right. And I have found this also when I sit with clients. And the thing that I talk to them about is, from a humanistic psychology perspective, this diagnoses really are something to inform care. That's all, right? And I needed to bill Blue Cross. Like, that's right. It checks a box. But there's so much overlap that, like, maybe we don't need to get hung up in the weeds about like what exact diagnosis this is, but rather recognizing that these patterns exist for that person and try to get some more understanding and get some more treatment around that. So whether we call it the attachment disorder is a problem, or whether we call it trauma, that's a problem, or whether we call it borderline, that's the problem. Those things all share so many traits that if we're treating those traits at some level, I don't believe that it matters exactly what it is.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's less about the diagnosis of the illness and more about the treatment of the symptoms.
Yeah, because I think that there's so much healing power that can be had for each one of those types of traits, that like whatever it is, that can be less present in your life. Like it's possible to achieve that as long as you're seeing, okay, well, maybe it's a part of the discussion. The diagnosis is part of the discussion. But I oftentimes will hear clients say, well, I feel much better about calling it anxiety than I do about calling it trauma. Right. And I'm like, well, I think that's okay, as long as we recognize that what's happening is the same thing. So let's focus on what's happening.
Yeah. And not turning blinders to it or ignoring it.
Yeah. And also not being so fearful of like the label of trauma, right? Like, I don't want to call it that, because then that means that I'm crazy. And I'm like, you have no idea how many traumatized individuals are walking around out here. Right. Like this is unfortunately, like, that's a part of the experience, but it doesn't mean that you're crazy. I think that especially for someone who's seeking more understanding, like we talked about in our last talk about, like, whether it's through books or it's through talking with your partner who's supportive and healthy, or it's going to therapy, whatever it is, like, you're seeking understanding, and that is a healthy response, no matter what kind of problems it is that you're having. The fact that you're trying to investigate is important.
100%. The last few qualities that can be attributed to the anxious preoccupied is they notice small changes. So they're also very hypervigilant. Ooh. I get so worried about things flying up my nose.
Oh, a little gnat. Oh no.
Yeah. Don't want that rattling around in there.
No.
My goodness. So they also have hypervigilance, just like the fearful avoidant. And they tend to blow up over those small changes. So unlike the fearful avoidant, they will use protest behavior that is negative to draw that attention in, because if you're fighting with me, well, you're still here and love me, you're not walking out the door.
Yeah. I have heard people describe it, and I'm sure with you guys' relationship, discussions that you've heard this before, where people will say fighting is passion, right? And they confuse these terms, and like, that's that level of passion, I think, although, maybe you could say, when I'm fighting for rights about something, or when I'm fighting for something that I believe in my life, like that is passionate, right? But to apply it in a relationship setting, I think we have to be careful with that.
Definitely.
We have to recognize that, like, you know, maybe some level of like minor conflict could suggest that you really believe in something and that you're comfortable enough to counter your partner on that or have that discussion. But when we're seeing like screaming matches as something that is positive and passionate, like that's right. That's where I think it's helpful when we get into like talk therapy, because then we start to see that there is gray area or there is levels to things. There is a spectrum of things. Like at this core unit, it's maybe we could say, yeah, that's comfortability and you trust that person and you can go there with them. But there are outliers too, and we cannot call that the same thing.
Right. Yeah. And then the last one, secure attachment. This one's going to be pretty easy to blow through. It is having a positive view of oneself and others. They are able to derive their self-worth from themselves and their actions. They believe that romantic love never fades, even when there's disagreements or arguments within the relationship. They love their partner despite their flaws, and they don't throw those things in their face. They have high conflict resolution. They have a positive view of sexual activities, and it's not something that's manipulated within the relationship. And they know their wants and needs. They know that those things matter, and they're able to communicate them within the relationship without feeling guilty.
Secure.
Very secure. Healthy. Yeah.
So, but I noticed as we were describing, and I love that we kind of like had these descriptions as back to back, because I don't think I would have picked this up before we had this conversation. But like all of the other problematic attachment styles did not have the quality of being able to have self-empowerment. Self was not in the picture.
Yeah.
Right. The security within the self, I think, is I think it's a massive part of why so many other troubles start, right? Whether it's a reaction to trauma, whether it's depression, anxiety, that maybe over time your world concept and worldview has warped in some level. But I think that the most healing thing that you could do is to try to look inside of self and start trying to love on yourself, trying to support your own wants, needs, desires, trying to communicate those things, checking in about the way that you're communicating those things. It's really, self-love is so healing. And I know that sounds very like broad spectrum, but I mean, we just saw that all of the other attachment styles, this person was fearful and did not have a positive view of self. Secure attachment. So when you're good for you, you're good for others. Right. You can, that's right. That's the whole thing. And I think one of the biggest problems that people have is that they're just not taught self-love enough.
I agree with that. And it's very unfortunate to recognize that. And that was a really good like connection of the dots that you just made, because even in making these notes, it didn't dawn on me that the secure attachment is the only one where that self-worth is derived from themselves. They're not seeking that validation or reality check from others outside of them. And
and it goes back to the sayings, right? Like you've got to love yourself before you can love anybody else. People are like, that's bullshit. Right? Like, and you're like, no. But for real though, like that's a true thing. Or at least, like when you want to deepen your connections, we can't say that people who are hurting do not make powerful, loving connections. But what I'm suggesting, I think, by that is saying that perhaps neither of you are your best selves until you have more ability to self-soothe and have self-empowerment and love self. And that will just open up doors for you to love your partner differently, or to love your family members or your friends differently, and from a space that is much healthier, because you yourself will feel better and you will be healthier to be around. Right. So I think it's just, it all yeah, I wanted to make that clarification. It's like not suggesting that people who are in a bad way can't make great connections,
Right.
but we should be careful because you are in a bad way. And so what you're allowing in your world might be different. The types of people that you're allowing in your space might be different.
Mm-hmm.
The way that you see yourself within those spaces might be different.
Definitely. And I love that you said not just romantic partners, family members, and friendships, because all of these attachment styles can be applied to anybody in your life, children, friends, family, exes, all of those.
Yeah, how you see your world changes when you love self.
Mm-hmm.
How you see your connections with others changes when you love self. And I also think I love what you said about like it very much applies to all these different types of relationships, because one of the things that we talk about when I am with my clients in therapy is like, is my picker broken?
Yeah.
Like when I pick other people for who I'm around
mm-hmm.
or where I spend my time even, right? Like, am I choosing things that are not good for me, places that are not good for me, people that are not good for me? And how do we, I don't know, for lack of a better word, fix that, right? How do we correct that? How do we change that for something healthier?
So I do have a few questions here for you. And the first one is, knowing that attachment styles start developing in infancy, how important do you think it is for adults to reflect on their childhood and process?
Oh, so important. So important. I think the way that we do that matters, because without what I'll say about that is like, this is a good reason for people to even just try therapy out, right? Look into a provider or someone who does trauma work or some kind of deeper rooted things, right? Not just like cognitive behavioral therapy is often seen as like, what can I do to adjust my behavior, right? But that's not looking at the history. So if you find someone that you can talk with about history because you're seeing problematic things that you're currently doing in your life, I wonder if a lot of that doesn't come from what we learned as children, but we don't see it that way. So it's important to have a therapist or someone who can talk with you through it that can phrase it like that, because sometimes you won't see it, right? People are like, I had a decent childhood. I don't really think anything happened there. And I'm like,
right. Let's take a look at this thing under the rock real quick.
Yeah. Even if it's not something that's actively preoccupying your mind, that you recognize as like a traumatic experience, right? I was talking with someone and they said, I am anxious about everything. And obviously what's happening in our world right now is like really unsettling for a lot of people, right? Valid, right? But why can this person not handle, anything, right? Work, their kids go to school, not just the political environment, but how they see themselves, right? And so as I got to talking with this person, there's like an intake thing that I have to go through. Like, so on a first visit, I have to ask a bunch of questions about history, right? Because it's meant to give me a full scope of how this person, got here, basically. And so mine's a little bit more free forms. Other practitioners are like, they're going to sit you down with a clipboard and ask all the detailed questions right out the gate, which is a little bit shocking to people sometimes. But, as we were going through this first initial session, I was like, oh, they were talking to me about people in their life before in their, childhood stuff where they didn't feel very heard. Right. And I was like, they just had a lot of adults in their lives who were constantly giving them directives and only giving feedback when they needed correction. So you don't know how to like feel good about the decisions that you're making. You don't know how to celebrate that. You don't know how to, right? You didn't have anybody in your life telling you to do a good job. They were, so now we're like adults and we have to make all these decisions on our own. And they're like, I don't know how to do that. Where's the correction that I'm used to? Where's the rubric? Where's the rule sheet? Where's the blueprint? Right.
Right.
And it makes for someone who is just simply needs a little more confidence boost. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't have a specific traumatic thing that happened. They just needed somebody to point out some themes. And they go, oh, I think we might be onto something with that.
Right. I can't remember what I was reading. You know, before I even jumped into this, I just received a pop-up saying that our meeting is going to end in 10 minutes.
I can.
Okay.
Man, you guys are good at this. I just sent Chris an email and was like, oh, I'm good if you want to call it or if you want to like reschedule or whatever. He had already sent me a new link.
Yeah. My husband is on top of it all the time.
All right.
Okay. And I actually remember, before we get into that, sorry for the really weird cut, guys. We were having some technical difficulties. I was trying to say issues at the same time and it all just merged. But I believe the last thing that I was saying was if somebody is unwilling to teach their partner who has one of the disorganized attachment styles, that could further their traumatization of I am not worth this. I'm not worth being loved. Or my parents were right. I am just a piece of shit.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think that you're right to caution people with that tale, right? Cautionary tale of if you're not willing, that's okay, but choose people in a different space,
yes.
Right? Like you have to have a conversation about what that is not like for you to, you know, I didn't know what this was, right? Mm-hmm. But then also for the person who is experiencing very disorganized or fearful attachment styles, avoidant attachment styles, having an understanding of they will also choose potentially partners, like their picker is also broken.
Mm-hmm.
They might choose people with the intention of shoving them away and saying, see, look, I told you. Right. So it could be that this is like the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So it's got to be handled delicately and maybe with a lot of conversation or, you know, an understanding of where you are and where I am is just on different pages. You know, I think that you could benefit, right? If your partner if you're the partner with the secure attachment style, maybe you say to this person, if you're intending to exit the relationship, hey, look, you know, I didn't know what this was going to be, but you need to get some better understanding around this, right? At least leave them with like something that will be helpful to them because they didn't, you know, maybe mean that, or they didn't know what they were doing, or they've never had a name for it, right?
Right.
You could do best by a person that you cared about, even if it doesn't work, by just telling them, I think you need to look at this.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. My next question is, how detrimental do you think protest behavior can be in a relationship? And protest behavior can look like back-to-back calling, 20 text messages in 10 minutes, ignoring them, hoping that they engage, or keeping score.
Yeah, I mean, the relationship's going to go terribly if you do that, right? Like if you're a person whose anxiety is so out of, like you cannot regulate at all, mm-hmm. Right? And that's what this leads into, can be very damaging. I mean, potentially the end of the relationship, because there's no tolerance for the other person's life in that space, right? Like if they're at work, right? Or if they asks you for a 10-minute breather and you cannot hold that for any length of time, then they have to be glued to you when you are in crisis, and then they are just like putting out fires, right? And so that's going to be very exhausting for the partner who is genuinely maybe trying to do right by this person, right? But the level of caretaking that's needed when the one partner is constantly in crisis like that is very damaging.
I agree with that. We have received a couple of emails from the men's perspective where we had an emailer who was a mechanic, And while he's at work, he can't pay attention to his phone. That's one of those things where if he's looking at his phone and he doesn't do something properly, someone can get seriously injured.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that his woman blew up his phone nonstop for 2 hours until he finally answered, and then just blew up, raged about it, and then hung up on him. And that is definitely one of those chaotic things, like you said, putting out fires.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, this person's going to feel like they're not a partner, but like an emergency button,
Yeah.
right? Like you need so desperately and in so many spaces about things that should not be that. Nobody was dying. Nobody was in the hospital. Nobody had, like, you know what I mean? Like that's where you call, I mean, call their mother, call somebody, you know what I mean, to get a hold of them, or have someone walk up to their job, right? And like, let them know you have to leave now, right? But if it's not that, then the expectation is unreasonable.
I agree. Definitely. So we're getting up to like the last 10 minutes of being able to be here. So I'm going to pick one more question from my list, and then I have a question about something kind of related that we can tie in.
Okay, great.
So this one is: the most important thing a mother can provide her kids is an emotionally safe and rich environment in childhood. What is one piece of advice that you would give mothers who are listening?
Ask them and hear them, because they're little humans that have their own ideas about things and their own experiences, right?
Yeah.
Even at multiple ages, different stages, right? Even before you think that they have any capacity to describe to you what their real experience is, right?
Mm-hmm.
At like age 2, right? Ask, right? What did you see? Why did you go there? Right?
Yeah.
Oh, I saw something I wanted to, right? They don't know that they can't touch that because it's hot,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and that's fine that you freak out first and like grab them and, you know, like after the crying thing, but like decompress with them, right? Help them to understand why mommy got afraid, or why this, you know, is inappropriate. That's how you cultivate, I think, an emotionally supportive and safe environment, is by asking questions and hearing their answers, as well as giving directives and trying to maintain their safety and all of that good stuff.
I love that answer. That was a really good one.
Yay. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And then the last thing I'm going to ask, and then we can wrap up. So have you heard of the let them theory?
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that can tie into the attachment styles? Well, let's touch on the let them theory just real quick and then tie it in.
Yeah. I think that simply the way that I understand that let them theory is exactly that. What someone is giving, let them, right? Acknowledge that. And then you can decide whether or not you want to work with that. But don't try to change it, because that's too close. Mm-hmm. That's too much. That's too far, right? Now you're trying to expend energy that you don't have, and it's going to be exhausting, right? You're overextending yourself. But when you let them show you who they are, let them show up for you or not, let them tell you whether or not they think this or that, right? And don't try to like curb it at all, right? Now we see the true situation, and we can make those decisions and accordingly, right? But I think the way that ties into attachment is kind of like what we were talking about before, giving the ball back.
Yeah.
Right? They're going to try to approach you anxiously, or like, you know, shove you away, or we let them. And maybe the whole thing about that is kind of what we were also saying before. Just tell them ask them to also identify what they're doing, right? They're going to freak out. They're going to cause problems. They're either going to try to step to you or away from you, right? Mm-hmm. And perhaps you, as the person who has a solid attachment style, is like watching this whole meltdown happen, and you go, these are the things that I think you need to work on. I'm here, right? Why is this happening? And point it out, right?
And it doesn't have to be pointed out in a way that makes them feel guilty or in a way that shames them.
Sure. Right? Exactly. I just need you to see what you're doing.
Right.
I just need you to hear you for a moment, because this is what I have a problem with, or this is what I struggle with, or this is what I don't know how to work with, right? This is why we need therapy, or this is why I think you need therapy, or, right? Whatever that conversation looks like. But I want you to see what you're doing. And then now, because this is what's happening, I need to take a 10-minute breather, or like, I'll be right back, or, whatever that looks like, right? Or because of this, and it's been like this for months or for years, right? Because of this, I have to go and stay with someone for a week, or like figure out what this is like, or call me when you're calmed down type of thing, right? Because I think the thing is we can't always handle things gently, but we can handle things firmly and without trying to, like you said, shame or go like fight fire with fire, right? Firm is best. Firm is stick with the facts. Firm is don't get lost in the weeds on what they're telling you or what they're showing you or what they want you to believe or how you are supposed to feel about that, right? This is my experience and this is why it's inappropriate.
Beautiful answer. I very much enjoy these discussions with you. You are a very enjoyable person to speak to.
Oh, I love that so much. You guys are too. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is cool because it's real conversations amongst just friends out in the real world and investigating these concepts that are so important to the human experience.
Right.
I don't like to talk about the weather. Yeah. Right. Like that's, a fun intro, but really, like, how you doing? Like how are we really? And I think that these types of conversations, I want listeners to be able to mirror this with their friends and their family and their people in their lives, because it doesn't take, a licensed mental health professional all the time. It doesn't take a podcast personality all the time to have these discussions, right? We just learn stuff and then go ask people about it.
Right. And that's the beauty of, in my opinion, having community, being able to have those conversations and bounce those ideas off of each other and provide a support, because a lot of these conversations aren't easy to have.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong here, but like, if we're trying to, difficult conversations is the thing that made me think of, like, politics, religion, mental health, right? Yeah. Like those are
definitely a good layout.
Right. It's a big deal. But like, if we learn stuff and we ask questions, especially with people that we're close to, I think that's the best way to try to have a tough conversation, because they're still worth having. I mean, clearly we exist in an environment where, like, our society is so broken. Oh, so many people feel that brokenness in their personal life. We have so many people who are not willing to have those conversations, and that's why they wind up hurting others, right? So, like, we need to have these talks. And I get that mental health is expensive. So if you can't go to therapy, totally fine. Read a book and ask your friends about it, right? Consume some other mental health, consume this podcast and then go talk to your friends about it, right? Like consume rock music that handles all kinds of mental health topics and then go talk to your friends about it. Like, just, those are things that everybody can do. And I would encourage that they should do. So, because you might unlock something. If you ask a question about a song, it's way less intimidating than trying to go to your friends about your problems, your personal problems, right? But it could lead into that.
It could.
This conversation had tons of through lines, tons of connective tissue that I think it could just open that door, and it's a way easier way of having those conversations or starting those conversations. Use podcasts, use music, use books to bring up topics that might be uncomfortable for you, but might lean into, now I've identified this other friend of mine who likes having these talks, right? Like you were saying to me, and I feel like that's a giant compliment. You're like, you're great to talk to.
Yeah.
Awesome. Like now that we've identified that, right? If we were friends in RL, right? Like
Right.
I was down the road, you might be like, you know what? I'm gonna call in Amanda. Like, cause I have this thing, but like, now that I know that Amanda's good to talk to, like maybe she could help me out with this thing, or maybe I could share this with her. And so, you investigate and you see in the world around you, who is safe to have these conversations with.
Yeah.
You won't know until you try to have a talk and you're like, well, I don't want to start with my personal business. Cool. Start with a book, start with a podcast, start
TV show.
TV show, something that you see, Netflix series. What's the newest, wildest thing that you saw, right? Because there's so much media that tackles these topics. But like, if you're not taking that into your home and out in your real world, then it has no application.
Definitely. Well, thank you for being here today. Would you like to plug your socials real quick?
Yeah, you know what? I'm all over social media, but I also sing in a rock band. So that's why I'm on socials. So Amanda is my name, and I'm a therapist, and I'm also a musician. So you can check out Eva Under Fire on all of the platforms. And that's where you can, I mentioned music as mental health, and that's where you can find some.
I love it. Thank you guys for being here today. We hope that you gained something from this episode. Maybe there's a few golden nuggets in there for you. And we would love to have you again for another episode. We just got to devise what we want to talk about.
Yeah, let's just keep hanging out. We'll see. Wait, I got new music coming out. You guys got an awesome podcast. I'm sure we'll find something to talk about.
Yep. And with that, we will bid thee all adieu.
Much love. Bye, guys.
See you later.